Sage.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. As the country marks the second anniversary of the death of Queen Elizabeth II, we send good wishes to her successor, King Charles III, who ascended to the throne 2 years ago, and who, despite being diagnosed with cancer, is fulfilling official engagements and plans a state visit to Australia in October. Well, by that time, the Conservative Party will probably not have concluded its leadership contest. I'll be asking my panel whether the attention given by the media to the first round of voting is merited, given how shriveled the Tory party now is. Is what the candidates say about policy of any interest if years of Labour government stretch ahead of us? Jane Austen is one of Britain's most famous writers in history, and an annual festival celebrates her work and life each September in Bath. Jenny Trent Hughes, author and broadcaster, will join me and fill me in on that festival. I'll be joined also in studio by Fabio D'Andrea, a visionary composer and film director who, like genius composers of the past, has written pieces in every key of the chromatic scale. Blending classical tradition with modern flair, he crafts 21st century masterpieces that resonate with today's audiences. Stefan Kyriazis, the esteemed arts editor of the Daily Express, has, as one might expect, immersed himself in the vibrant world of theatre once more. And this week, he'll also review a revived Tom Stopper play at the Old Vic, a reinvention on stage of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland as well. Now, before all of that, your headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. Now it's time for your latest GB News headlines. Today marks 2 years since the passing of Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. She was on the throne for 70 years and was beloved by the nation and around the world. The King and Queen are expected to attend a church near Balmoral this morning for prayer and remembrance of his late mother. The Prime Minister has hit out at the previous government this morning, saying the NHS has been broken in ways that he called unforgivable. These comments come as a Labour-commissioned review into how children are treated by the NHS is due to be published in the coming week. Speaking earlier to the Camilla Tominey show, Health Secretary Wes Streeting set out Labour's plan to tackle the NHS crisis.
My reform agenda is about three big shifts out of hospital into the community. So we get the GP appointments that people need, the social care that people need. care closer to people's homes, better for patients, better value for taxpayers. It's a shift from analogue to digital, so we're not working with outdated systems and allowing the waste in the NHS to go unchallenged. And then thirdly, from sickness to prevention, making sure we're supporting people not just to live longer, but to live well for longer through good public health and prevention measures. Those are the pillars of Labour's reform agenda.
Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Atkins told GB News that she's concerned Labour are using this report to cover their plans to increase taxes.
What concerns me about the way that Labour is seeking to report this report is that they seem to be chasing headlines. Lord Darcy is a very respected, eminent surgeon. Of course, he is also, it's fair to say, a former Labour minister and a former Labour peer. But this report should be about what the state of the NHS is and providing solutions. And what worries me is that Labour is using this report as cover for the tax rises they plan to raise on us all at the budget in October.
Last night, Donald Trump spoke in Wisconsin, a key area for his election campaign. The Republican presidential candidate pledged trade restrictions and to clamp down on immigration. Trump was also critical of both current US President Joe Biden and his election opponent, Kamala Harris. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Biden won, I will never know. To me, it's one of the greatest miracles. To me, it's a great miracle. But how the hell that guy won? But he won, and he got, in this one, he got 14 million votes. She got no votes. And then they put her in anyway. The bosses put her in because she's controlled by them. But she will be the worst president. He is the worst president in history. She will be worse than him. She will be worse than him. And Trump is never wrong. I am never, ever wrong.
Back in the UK now, the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for rain for much of England and Wales, which will remain in place now till 6 o'clock tonight. They've said this means a small chance of power cuts and flooding in people's homes, with some areas expecting up to 60 millimetres of rain by the end of the day. The annual conference for the Trades Union Congress begins in Brighton today. They say topics on the agenda will include protecting the right to strike, building a fairer economy and winning a better future for working people. Oasis announced last night that they would send out an invite-only registration form for people to join a private ballot for tickets. This comes after millions attempted to obtain tickets last weekend for the band's gigs next summer, but many were left disappointed. Oasis and Ticketmaster have also faced criticism following so-called dynamic pricing being used, leading to an investigation being launched. If you received that email overnight, good luck to you to try and get those tickets. And we're now into the final day of the Paralympics over in Paris. Team GB have already won a massive 120 medals and will still be hoping to add to that total. David Weir was hoping to improve on the 5th place he achieved in Tokyo in the men's T54 marathon, but only managed to equal his position this morning. But the Brits still aren't done. They have medal hopes yet to go in the para-canoe and para-powerlifting events. The closing ceremony will take place tonight, with swimmer Poppy Maskell and taekwondo athlete Matt Bush carrying the flag for Team GB. Those are your latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in the next hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Many thanks to Sophie Reaper. Conservative members of Parliament have undertaken a first round of voting for a new leader, and the top candidate scored 28 supporters, a low number which emphasises how tiny the parliamentary party now is. Candidates are finessing their policies on tax and immigration as though they were preparing for government, which seems far-fetched. Should they not compete purely on strategies to drive Labour from office? Does any of them have a clue how to do that? I'm joined now by Madeline Grant, assistant comment editor and parliamentary sketch writer for The Telegraph, the pollster with jail partner Scarlett Maguire and trade unionist Andy Twelves. Welcome all of you to GB News. Madeleine, are you surprised, as I am, at the amount of attention being given to the Conservatives, who are now, I mean, virtually a rump party?
Yeah, I am quite surprised by it, actually. I found, for example, in my job as a parliamentary sketch writer, I've been encouraged to kind of follow the leadership race. But actually, in general, what seems to really drive the numbers at the Telegraph in readership has been, you know, just essentially following what Labour are doing, and some pretty nutty policy announcements coming out of their camp in the last couple of weeks. But I suppose that actually, you know, we are in an era where the old party loyalty has basically evaporated, and elections can turn very, very quickly. You know, we saw what happened between 2019 and 2024. And I don't know, I mean, were people really talking in the same way about, say, David Cameron and David Davis in 2005? But then, obviously, within a few years of that race, David Cameron was the Prime Minister.
Well, I think I was relying on my own memories because, of course, I was defeated in 1997 and the Conservatives went down to whatever it was, 165 seats, a rump that I had no particular wish to lead at the time.
Yes.
And I remember the absolute feeling of irrelevance that Conservatives had, because we clearly weren't going to be in power for more than a decade. What about my other point that, you know, they're all busy finessing their policies? Don't Conservative supporters really want to know how Labour is to be got rid of?
Yes.
I mean, who is the leader who, at the dispatch box and on television, is going to make life hell for Keir Starmer? Isn't that what we should be looking for?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. However, you know, because of the volatility of politics right now, I do think that you don't want to end up in a situation like, for example, during the 1970s, where there were swift changes of power and you'd have a Ted Heath and then it would go back to Wilson or whatever. And actually, people would be turfed out pretty damn quickly because they didn't have a coherent plan for fixing the country and fixing the economy. And I think there is a feeling in many Conservative circles that they really failed so badly at the last election that they have to go back to first principles and take a look at themselves and really, it's almost an existential question, what are we for as a party? And maybe you need to have that conversation before you can start to get to the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of, you know, hammering away at Labour every week.
Andy Charles, putting my 2 points together, I suppose Conservatives participating in the leadership race would say, look, it is precisely that Labour is going to be vulnerable on immigration. And this is for two particular reasons. One is that Labour doesn't seem to take immigration very seriously. They've got rid of the Tory policies, such as they were, and they've not replaced them with anything else. And the second is that Labour has a lot of very narrow victories in seats that won at the general election, and some of those next time could be vulnerable, in particular if Reform UK is there competing in those seats. So bringing those points together, do you think that Labour does have that vulnerability? Does that begin to explain why the Conservatives are still talking so much about immigration in their leadership race?
Well, I think, in fairness, Parliament has only been sitting, you know, since the election for what, maybe a total of 3 weeks. So I think it's a little bit unfair to go, oh, well, they haven't pushed through any legislation. I mean, give them a month at least, you know, of actual sitting parliamentary time, I would say. But on immigration, I think, yes, definitely, it's a really key issue, and a lot of constituencies, both marginal and non-marginal for the Labour Party, where they want to increase or just keep their majorities. So I think it is important that the kind of Conservatives keep that kind of debate alive within their leadership contest. But then they shouldn't neglect other areas, because one of the key things for me as a Labour Party supporter, I think it is important for democracy to have a credible opposition on a range of issues, on all kind of legislative affairs, not just niche topics like, you know, the certain technicalities of the border force, or, you know, the certain ways that the boats come over. I think they should be focusing on the wider policy platform to have a credible opposition. So then, you know, when it comes to 2029, the next general election, that the British people actually have a choice, rather than kind of, I think Lord Farmer was suggesting 2 years of kind of rest and recuperation and 3 years of building it back up. I think, you know, there needs to be a credible opposition on not just immigration, but, you know, a wider range of issues.
Do you say a Conservative leadership candidate with sufficient charisma for the job? I mean, it's not that it strikes directly with the public, but the performances at the dispatch box have an impact on the morale of the parliamentary party, and therefore they are important. Do you see a Conservative leadership candidate who could perform at the dispatch box in a satisfactory way?
I think a few of them have shown, you know, decent showings at the dispatch box when they were in the cabinet last year. I think Jenrick is clearly quite a good speaker. You know, he's been on a bit of a PR journey over the last couple of years, you know, going from slightly kind of Tory wet to kind of right-winger, having his Ozempic. You know, he's been on a real kind of brand PR push. He admitted it. He's been on a real PR push, and I think that is showing in this kind of early stages of the election. But then also Mel Stride, there's Melmentum. I think James Hill coined it. And Mel has been around for ages, and I think he would be actually, if Lord Farmer is wanting some rest and recuperation over the next 2 years, he'd be a credible candidate who would do quite well over the dispatch box.
Scarlett, as a pollster, help us with this, because these elections are complicated because the candidates are appealing in the first instance to members of Parliament, and in the second instance to Conservative members in the country, and in the third, but more distant instance, to the British public at the next general election. How do you reckon the candidates are weighing those considerations in the way that they present themselves now?
I think the candidates, as always with leadership races, we saw this in the last race to become leader of the opposition, which was, of course, the Labour Party in 2020. They actually think about the members, really, first and foremost. So at the moment, obviously, they'll be busy ringing MPs, and I'm sure they'll be spending more time doing that than they necessarily will be with local associations. But I think in terms of their pitches, they're thinking about how do they make the best appeal to those members. Now, it's not many of them, probably around 100,000, that will make that decision come end of October, November. But I think that's what they'll be thinking of in the public very much as a secondary consideration to that, although some of them will be trying to use their appeal to the public as a way of saying to the members, you should really vote for me.
When I was a Member of Parliament, I had a constituency and I had a Conservative association. And even in those days, when Conservative associations were much stronger than they are now, it struck me that the Conservative association was not particularly representative of the public. Do you have any evidence as to how representative these Conservative voters in the country, there's 100,000 that you've mentioned, how representative they are of the public? In other words, to what extent can Conservative leadership candidates go badly astray, seizing as many of those 100,000 votes as they can, and then possibly losing millions when it comes to an election?
I think they can go very badly astray doing that, and we've seen that. And again, I'll use actually the Labour Party parallel. We know that Keir Starmer, in order to appeal to the membership, had to make an awful lot of promises, which he's now jacked since becoming leader of the opposition, and then, of course, Prime Minister, because he realised they do not appeal to the public at general. And that is the same for Conservative politicians and their appeal to Conservative associations. We know that they do tend to be to the right of the public, although it's important to remember that there might not be that much of a difference now between the associations and the people who voted for them, given that so few voted for them at the last election. But of course, you're thinking about trying to win over voters that voted for other parties as well, as they will absolutely need to do. But I also think that there's a certain amount of stereotyping that goes with local associations, and we know from when we've done focus groups with them that they're not always what you think they are, and they actually can hold, like all of us, quite contradictory opinions that point to different directions, and they're not all just sort of raging right-wingers, which is often how they're portrayed.
That is an absolutely valid point, and from my own experience, I entirely endorse that. Madeleine, what would be your analysis of the vulnerability of the Labour government? I mean, you said before, I'm not sure I agree with you very much on this, but you know that this government could be toppled in a single parliament. Well, if that were to happen, what would be the vulnerability that would force Labour out within the course of one parliament?
Well, I think that, I don't think that this is likely. I think it's possible. It's within the realms of possibility. That's what I'm saying. I certainly don't think Conservatives should look at some of the less able members of the current front bench and say, oh, we've got this in the bag. Absolutely not. People are justifiably furious with the Conservatives and remain so. And just because they're becoming more angry with Labour doesn't mean anything in itself. But the point about the vulnerabilities, I think that when life becomes more expensive under Labour, which I think it will, I think we're going to talk later, I think, about energy policy. That is one area where I think very quickly the promised gains, the promised savings to people's budgets, which they hammered home relentlessly during the general election, when that doesn't come to pass and people find that life is more expensive. And the backlash to the removal of the winter fuel payments has been extreme and extremely dissatisfied. And it seems to be unpopular in all sections of society, not just from those who personally it applies to them. And I also think there is a lack of charisma, and there is also a problem where the language that is often used by Labour ministers, they are using these buzzwords which become a bit of they really start to irritate people when they're used relentlessly. There's almost mirth now when they say the £22 billion black hole or fixing the foundations. And a lot of their comm strategy is just repeating these buzzwords over and over again. I think people are quite fed up with all politicians, and even although I don't particularly rate many of the front bench, having, part of my job is to watch them day in, day out, unlike most people, I've been surprised by how quickly the public seems to be turning away from them. I thought it would take 6 months to get to where we are now.
Labour, of course, began government with quite a small measure of popular support. It won with a very small percentage. And the TUC's meeting at the moment. Some unions have been critical of the decision on the winter fuel payments. On the other hand, people are saying, oh, the unions have done brilliantly under this government. The train drivers and the doctors and so on have all been paid off. My question is, I think, what part do you think splits will play over the next 5 years?
I think, certainly the trade unions have kept the party going over the last 14 years of opposition. And I think certain members of the parliamentary party, the kind of socialist campaign group, they recognise that and they know that, and they kind of go, yeah, fair enough, we'll give a bit back. But I think, Keir Starmer and the cabinet, obviously I don't speak for Keir Starmer, and I can't speak to his mentality, but what I imagine is that he'll have seen these kind of public sector pay rises as, yeah, thanks for the last 14 years, now leave us to it for the next 4. I think there will be a growing split between the trade unions, particularly the TUC as a kind of lobbying body, and the government, as we saw, under Blair and Brown, when Blair refused to roll back on some of the legislation Thatcher and Major pushed through on, like, minimum service requirements and that kind of thing. I think there will be a split, and I think that will really impact the Labour Party on a local level, because realistically, the grassroots of the party are predominantly trade unionists. When they're calling people up to go out and stuffing letterboxes in December for county council by-elections, I think that's where they will really, really struggle. And I think Keir Starmer will have to kind of rein it in slightly and kind of go more pro-trade union, which isn't a bad thing for me, but more pro-trade union in the next couple of years.
Scarlett, I've been talking about the Labour government's vulnerability. Tell me about its vulnerability to Reform UK as you see it at the moment.
It is vulnerable to Reform UK, but part of the problem that Labour has is, as you mentioned, they only won with 34% of the vote off a low turnout, so only 2 in 10 people voted for them, full stop, which is quite striking, 2 in 10 of the eligible electorate, that is. And the problem is that they're facing fights on multiple fronts, so they're facing threats across the board. We actually polled Labour voters quite recently, and we found that half of them would consider voting for Green, and 1 in 4 would consider voting for Reform UK. So their electoral coalition, which I don't think feels a huge amount of loyalty to the party, is already being pulled in quite different directions. Reform UK came second to them in about 90 seats. Now, in a lot of them, they weren't a very close second, but we've seen the damage they can do off a short campaign from a point where a year before they'd been polling in the single digits. And I think now that we're hearing that they're trying to put in a proper ground presence, which will see whether it's worked in the locals, I think they could mount a very serious threat to Labour. And actually, I think it's quite interesting if you think about the journey of Lee Anderson, obviously a presenter here, but the MP, and there was quite a lot of criticism when he defected to Reform. People were saying that it's sort of opportunist and that he constantly changes his stripes because he went Labour to Conservative to Reform. But actually what we found is that mirrors the journey of a lot of voters, and it's the voters that Labour are desperately trying to hold on to. You have Labour, then voted Leave, then voted Boris, and now really like the look of Reform and Nigel Farage. And I think given we know they're the voters Labour are obsessed over, if we're to believe reports, then I think they are under trouble. And I think what we're going to see is that, as Maddie said, I don't think actually it's necessarily the Conservatives that are going to capitalise on this, but I think we're going to see Labour fall in the polls a bit.
An information-packed answer. Thank you very much to Madeline, Scarlett and Andy, who will rejoin me in the next hour to debate the Labour government's apparent addiction to unachievable targets for house building and decarbonisation. Now, a quote, "I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library." End of quote. That's a passage from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Jenny Trent-Hughes will be talking to me about the forthcoming Jane Austen Festival in Bath. I'll be back in 3 minutes.
Nana are queer. Weekends from 3 p.m.
So Prince Harry, apparently, Operation Bring Harry In from the Cold. Do you feel there's any truth to this?
Lots of tongues are wagging, Nana. We heard that he was at the memorial for Lord Robert Fellows, and obviously William was there as well. And so there was lots of, everyone going into overdrive. That was in Stattisham, Norfolk the other day. He wasn't going to attend, said the People, mouthpiece of his. I would have actually thought that maybe a lookalike had turned up. But now we have been led to believe that Harry's been talking to people from friends from his old life. And it's not that he wants to make a permanent move to the UK, so I believe. What I've heard, it's more about his reputation.
Well, he wants to have his cake and eat it, by the sounds of it. I mean, obviously, no good cake remains uneaten.
We know that the royal family is his currency. I mean, even his late mother, you know, obviously he's almost usurped her memory, and he needs this. He needs this to make money. Of course, he raced in to Lord Robert Fellowes' memorial service. So there's lots of ambiguous behaviour, and he is going to be, you know, in New York. We call it the silly season, don't we? And we're also looking. There's lots of different stories that are coming out, but he needs to sell stuff. He's going to be in New York, and it's. You know, we've got to remember the enormous amount of hurt and offence. I mean, Prince William absolutely reeling. Poor Princess Catherine. You know, Spare book coming out at the most awful time, and you've got the Netflix
series.
It's absolutely, this is a rehabilitation strategy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. With her novels Persuasion and Northanger Abbey both set in Bath, the city has taken to honouring their author each year with the Jane Austen Festival. Over 3,500 Austen fans flock to the city, many in their Regency finery and many coming from abroad. You can join the throng and follow the author along streets whose buildings look much the same as when she strolled past them over 200 years ago. Dating back to 2001, the festival is the world's largest and longest-running celebration of the Romance writer. Originally created by the Jane Austen Centre in Bath and running over the course of one weekend, 23 years on, it's grown into a 10-day festival with more than 80 events. And to tell us more, I'm delighted to be joined now by author and broadcaster Jenny Trent Hughes. Jenny, let's have a look at you. You look absolutely splendid. Well, welcome to GB News. Tell me a little bit about what you're wearing.
I'm wearing, well, usually I have a character called the Queen of All Hearts, and I have a fantastic outfit designed by Bath Theatrical. I was on the way up to you this morning. I was so excited I was going to meet you finally, and because of the trains, I didn't get to come. So I had to run back to my boat. I live on a boat, which is why the background is a bit odd, and I'm in a Regency outfit.
Well, look, I'm absolutely delighted that you have put the outfit on for us, because also someone was bringing a dress to you and her train was cancelled as well.
Yes.
So we're just looking at some photographs now of what the festival looks like in the streets of Bath. So dressing up is obviously a big part of it. Have you any idea how many people dress up in order to participate?
Quite a few thousand, and so I went to the festival itself for the first time last year, and I was absolutely astonished. So the two ladies that you just saw, a mother and a daughter from Hawaii. I met people from Australia. I met people from Japan. They come from all around the world. It is absolutely astonishing.
And The festival is, when is the festival? Next week, is it?
Yeah, the festival starts next week. And when if anybody wants to really have a mind-blowing experience, just go to janeausten.co.uk and click on festival. The things that you can go there and learn are absolutely astonishing. How you would behave properly at a duel, their balls, I'm hosting a boat ride on going up a canal. There's lectures. You can learn how to make a reticule, learn how to make a headdress, learn how to make a parasol. And what really fascinates me is how many men get involved. Lot of men, and they look splendid.
Well, yes, I would love to participate. I mean, do you have to be signed up to turn up in costume, or can you just turn up in costume?
No, not at all. You can just turn up in costume. And if you go on the site, there's some events, like I'm doing some lectures about love, which is part of how I got involved in the whole concept in the first place, because I wanted to see what was really going on in society at the time that Jane Austen was writing those books. Why was she writing? What was she really writing about? Et cetera, which was really fascinating. So you go on there, some things you need to buy tickets for, some things are free, a lot of things are sold out, but you can put your name on waiting lists, or you can just put on a frock, or not a frock in your instance, and walk up and down and enjoy the sights.
Now, there is quite a scholarly element too, is there? I mean, for people who are real students of the novels, there'll be something to satisfy them too, will there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there really are. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of lectures and a lot of information. You know, there are people like me who I'm busy trying to tie together what we're doing in society now and how it relates to what they did then. And then there are people who are complete purists. You know, like last year, I was walking with sunglasses on, and somebody came over and got really stroppy, you know, and said you see, there I am in sunglasses, and you know, people didn't wear sunglasses then. So it depends on how far you want to take it, and a lot of the outfits are made. You know, there are people who had their outfits made, and part of it was their great grandmother's wedding gown. I mean, it's absolutely incredible how into it some of these people get.
Well, Jenny, of course, I must remind you that God gave us parasols. There was absolutely no need in those days to have sunglasses. You carried a parasol. It sounds absolutely...
Well, you had someone carry your parasol for you.
And better still, and a very good correction there. Look, I hope you have the most marvellous time, and I hope that it will be very well attended. I'm so sorry that I didn't get to meet you today. You were meant to come to the studio. The trains have made it impossible. You were meant to be united with a particular dress. The trains made that impossible. But let's hope that your passage to Bath will be very smooth and that you have an absolutely marvellous time.
And I have a gift to send you, because I was going to teach you all about how to flirt with a fan.
I don't have any fans, but I'm very pleased to learn how to flirt.
Well, this one was meant for you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenny Trent Hughes.
You're welcome.
Now, after the break, we'll be striking a chord with classical composer and film director Fabio D'Andrea, who uses centuries of musical influence to add awareness to modern-day social issues. Stay with us.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, today for some of us it's going to be very wet, risk of some thunderstorms in places too, but for others it will be fairly dry and bright. So as we start Sunday morning, a fairly wet picture across many parts of England and Wales, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. In between there will be some brightness, but really the best of the brightness will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some sunshine here. And as we go throughout the course of the day, very little changes, some heavy and torrential downpours in places. And for the north, a little bit cooler here than of late, with temperatures still in the low 20s, but certainly nowhere near as high as they were on Friday and Saturday. Into the evening, continue the risk of some further heavy and thundery rain across the south. Some fairly poor driving conditions in places, so do allow some extra time for your journeys. That rain will eventually pop up into parts of Scotland too, but at this stage, Northern Ireland remaining fairly dry and bright as we end Sunday evening. Some showers also just moving into parts of Shetland and Orkney. So all in all, a fairly wet picture for many of us as we end the weekend. Still some heavy rain around, but as we go through the course of the night, I think the rain beginning to ease, but still plenty of cloud and patchy rain in places. Driest across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a keen wind beginning to develop here from the northwest. But for all of us, it's a generally fairly mild night to come. So we start Monday off on a fairly grey and damp note across many parts of England and Wales, but sunshine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that will push its way into parts of Wales and southwest England as the day goes on. But the further east you are, remaining quite cloudy and damp as we go through the course of the day. And with this brisk northwesterly wind beginning to develop, for most of us, it will be feeling a little bit fresher with highs in the south, potentially up to 19 or 20 degrees.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. My next guest is a composer and film director whose musical journey began at the tender age of 4.5 when he started playing the piano. Under the tutelage of luminaries such as Sir George Benjamin and Sir Harrison Birtwistle, he has honed his craft, primarily grounding himself in the classical world. His work is deeply rooted in the classical tradition, yet it aims to resonate with contemporary audiences. Following in the footsteps of Bach, Chopin, Liszt, Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff, he has written music in sets of composition in the 24 major and minor keys of the chromatic scale, producing an album which is accompanied by 24 videos, and it's called 24. I'm joined now by Fabio D'Andrea. Fabio, great to see you. Tell me a little bit, I'm a layman when it comes to music, tell me a little bit about how a composer chooses a key and what it means to the composer to have chosen the key.
Sure. Well, I think every musical key, and there's 24 of them, major and minor, they have their own feel. So you could play a piece in, say, C major, which is normally regarded as the simple key, it's all the white notes on the piano. But if you play that piece, say, in A-flat major, it's going to have a very different feel. So I decided to create this project, 24 pieces, again, looking back at our traditions and the history of what composers have done in the past, especially in regards to piano music, and explore every key, see if I could bring out the emotion that you feel from that actual key itself.
Were you fonder of some than others? I imagine, for example, you're not so fond of C because it's too straightforward.
Actually, no, I love all of them. And that's the beauty of music. Every key has its own feel. And some keys are associated with different feelings. So, for example, C major has actually been historically associated with victory. It's quite a victorious feel about it. I love D-flat major. That's quite mellow. But every key has its own special feeling. And sometimes something will just sound different in that one key, and it's meant to be in that key. So for me, this has been a whole exploration of that.
Right. Now, tell me your relationship to atonal music. I talked about some of the people who taught you, and some people may have said, oh, I know their music, and that music is not for me. But they shouldn't be associating you too much with your teachers.
No. I mean, I've had some great teachers. I predominantly studied under George Benjamin. and Rob Keeley. Rob Keeley was my primary teacher. And Rob and I actually met recently. We were talking about music and how it's been evolving. But for me, my teachers were fantastic, and they really, I think, were more coming from this school of atonality, which to every layperson is basically where music sounds like it's in a horror movie. It's sort of all disjointed. But for me, I actually feel that in order to be progressive, we actually have to look back at our traditions, because tearing down our traditions is actually regressive. So by being progressive, I've been looking back at what composers in the past have done and actually returning to tonality and music that primarily is emotive. You want to feel music, you want it to emotionally touch you. And I think that's where classical music has lost its way in the 20th century. So hopefully with the 21st century, we're going to be discovering more ways that actually we can reconnect with that emotion.
Yes, I found it interesting as an observer that, for example, composers have been able to write things that the vast majority of us simply cannot understand. Now, this couldn't happen with novelists. You couldn't have the mass production of novels that people simply didn't understand, whereas it does seem to have happened quite a lot in classical music. Now, I imagine what I've just said, and I imagine what you've just said, is rather controversial. Is there a bit of a punch-up in classical music about all of this?
Well, no, I think, personally, I feel that culturally we've lost our way. We're actually in a real cultural decline at the moment.
Well, that sounds controversial.
Well, it probably does, but that's the truth of it. And we are rejecting, as I said, our traditions instead of building upon them. And music has always been used to unite society. And actually right now, where society seems to be falling apart, we need a cultural revolution, because cultural movements dictate society and actually dictate the way we morally progress, how we societally progress. So it's such an important tool. And what's happened within the history of music is that there was a breakdown of music. We deconstructed absolutely everything, and this is what led to atonality. But really, there's not been this reconstruction back, and sadly, classical music has lost its influence. It used to just be the big major force where people could talk about social issues, talk about change through music. And again, the listener could feel that emotionally and connect on that emotional level with what was being told through music. And I think that's part of my mission now, to actually try and create music that actually people can not only feel the emotion from it, but they can see that sort of societal change, because I can address themes that are important to them.
Before too long, we better hear some of your music. But just before we do that, tell me about making videos, because it's been said that 24 is essentially the first classical video album.
Yes, yeah. So obviously, taking this tradition of creating 24 piano pieces, I wanted to update it and make it a little bit more relevant to the 21st century. And for me, it was creating a video album, because we consume now our music on our phones predominantly, or iPads, and our phones and iPads are visual pieces of technology. So for me, this was a great way of how I could actually take that tradition but mix it in with something 21st century and create something new. But it's also allowed me to indulge my passion of filmmaking. So not only have I composed the pieces for this album, I've been able to direct, produce and edit my own music videos. So that's a bit of the thought process behind it all.
OK, let's hear and see a little clip. Right, do you, as it were, want to back-announce this clip? Tell us about this.
Sure. So in this video, which I released earlier this year, I asked Peter Andre to star in it. And it really tackles the themes of cyberbullying, bullying in general, and teenage suicide. So it's quite a heavy video, and it's quite gritty, to be honest. Shocked a lot of people when they first saw it. And I am pushing the boundaries of what a classical video or even a music video should be. These almost confuse people when they watch them, because they are like short films. Silent short films reminiscent of the old Hollywood golden era. And I've done that really so I can convey these messages. And why Peter and I chose to make this video is really just to speak to children and teenagers right now who are dealing basically with a cyberbullying pandemic. We don't know as society right now how to handle everything online and how to handle the harassment sometimes younger people can can be exposed to. So really through this video, we wanted just to encourage children and teenagers and young adults to talk if they're struggling, just to open up. And the whole video is called Another Way because it just shows that there are two ways. You don't have to turn to something such as suicide. That's not the way, that's not the answer. So that was the thought there.
Absolutely fascinating. What key was that in?
That one was in E major.
We've got some others that we'll just play under as we talk for the last couple of minutes now. So who else have you turned to in these videos? Who else appears?
Yeah, I've had a number of actors and celebrities I've asked to be in my videos. Russell Tovey starred in one called Something Left to Love, which deals with the issue of mental health. And I asked Rose Leslie, star of Game of Thrones and Downton Abbey and a few other shows, to appear in one. And that deals with the issue of hidden illnesses and in particular multiple sclerosis. And then I asked Mel B from the Spice Girls to star in one about domestic abuse. And Mel happily wanted to be part of this. And for me, I wanted to tackle an issue like domestic abuse because I think it's a hidden issue in society. There's many people that, both male and female, that are in awful relationships and suffering abuse. But also, for me, the most important thing is that violence is never the answer. And I feel that, again, in society right now, we're sort of normalising violence and actually making it something which is acceptable. And violence is never acceptable, especially in a relationship. And that's where most people would be victims.
Fabio, I very much enjoyed our conversation. You are giving a performance shortly in the Bloomsbury Festival.
Yes, that's correct.
Would you like to introduce that? Yeah. Where and when?
So I'll be performing at the Conway Hall in Holborn as part of the Bloomsbury Festival. It's a very special arts festival that goes on each year and showcases not just music, but theatre, visual arts. And that will be on Saturday, the 19th of October. In Russell Square, Holborn. And I will be not only performing some of these videos live to music, or showing the video and performing live.
Yep.
But I'll also be screening one of my latest videos, which stars the actor Jonah Howard-King. And so that's going to be quite a special performance. So if people want to find out about it, they can go to the Bloomsbury Festival website, which is bloomsburyfestival.org.uk, and they can search for me in 24 visual concerts and get tickets there.
You can search for Fabio D'Andrea. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, still ahead, we'll be whisked to indoor theatre by Stefan Kyriazis, who's been to see Tom Stoppard's 1982 play about love and the art of playwriting. And we'll also review the return of acclaimed production of The Mad Hatter's Tea Party, which is at the Royal Opera House.
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is a big old headache because we talk a lot about GP appointments, don't we? But certainly almost everyone I know struggles to see a dentist when they need one.
Yes. You know the best time to go to a dentist? When? 2:30. 2:30.
That's actually quite good. It's better than my gags.
The guy that went to Goa, to India, to get his dental treatment, is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, so tell us about that. This is how desperate people are to get treatment now. So what's the story?
OK, the story is a guy couldn't get an appointment at the NHS, so he went all the way to Goa in India to get his dental appointment. Now, I think he probably just wanted to go on holiday, and he thought, I know, why don't I go on holiday to Goa and then get my teeth done? Look, people are travelling in their droves. There's whole aeroplanes full of people with medical tourists. Like in Turkey, you get a whole aeroplane with people with hair implants, things like that.
Well,
yeah. I was going to go to
turkey teeth, isn't it?
Turkey teeth.
Turkey teeth. Well, now we've got
that's when they strip the tooth down and you have these little pegs.
Yes, they strip them down. But in many cases, they strip them down far too low, so the nerve is exposed and it gets infected, and it's exposed to the elements. So you get infection in the tooth, and then you have to essentially take them all off. But by then, the infection spreads so far. I was getting my nails done the other day, which I don't do very often, and my nail technician said to me, "Is your dad still a dentist?" And I said, "Yes." and she said, please, can I have emergency appointment? I went to Turkey and I got my teeth done, and now they look incredible, but I'm in so much pain. They're all infected. She had 15 taken out from the top and 12 from the bottom, and it's an absolute disaster. But this is what people are feeling like they have to do.
So medical tourism doesn't always work.
No, but it shows, doesn't it, Alex, that people can't get their teeth sorted here, so they go elsewhere. Listen, do you floss, by the way?
Don't floss. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to the programme. Arts editor of the Daily Express, Stefan Kyriazis, joins me now. And this week, Stefan, it has been the real thing, hasn't it?
It is. What's real, Michael? Are we real? Is this...
These are questions that are asked by Mr. Tom Stoppard.
It is.
And maybe so, Tom Stoppard.
And there's a lot of navel-gazing. Now, this is on at the Old Vic until October the 26th. And it's a very complicated setup. And actually what we've got is we've got the director in a little clip explaining what it's all about and what he thinks he's doing with it. And then I shall give you my thoughts. But I think we've got a clip here.
They all claim to be from a place called Wonderland.
That wasn't
that's
in
the
least bit like it.
The Real Thing is one of the most brilliant comedies written in the 20th century in the English language, about a family that suddenly starts going wrong when the guy has an affair, and it asks questions about what real love is. Is it something that we know instantly when it happens, or is it something that constantly changes and is a form of kind of arrangements that makes families last? And it asks questions about what's real in life, what's real in theatre, and what's real about who gets to write stuff. And it does this in a way that is beautifully deft with ideas and language and full of heart and lots of really good jokes.
I think I just heard the claim there that it was one of the most brilliant things written in the English language. Do you go along with that?
I think the writing is excellent, and there's no doubt that Stoppard is incredibly clever with words. There's a beauty of words. There's a line in the show where someone says, I don't think writers are sacred, but words are. And it was his backlash written in 1982 to the very kind of left-wing, sort of brutal intelligentsia of kind of earthy issues. I found it all a little bit... posh people on stage talking about posh people ideas and problems. I think I'm becoming a revolutionary. And it's very, very complicated. Stoppard likes plays within plays. So what we've got is we have an opening scene with Max and Charlotte, and he's toying with her in a very Noel Coward way, and it's all very sort of light banter and rhythms. But actually he knows that she's not been away on business, she's had an affair. And then we cut to Charlotte's house, where she is married to Henry, who wrote the play. Max turns up with his wife, Annie, who is also having an affair with Henry, the playwright. The three of them are actors. He's a playwright, so it's all that kind of talk. Annie is then obsessed with a Scottish squaddy who's in prison for defacing the cenotaph, which might be Stoppard's kind of subtle way of what he thinks other playwrights were doing at the time. And she takes up his cause. His play gets put on. She's also in another play with another young actor. We get all of those plays performed in snippets. She then has an affair with the young actor. The squaddy fancies her. It all goes round and round and round. In the middle of it is the central character of Henry, who is played by James McArdle, who is sensational. But it's just... I just sat there going, I don't care.
But two other questions. Could you understand it?
Yes.
And was it entertainment?
Yes, I could, and yes, it was. But did I think that there was a point to it anymore? Not really. I've seen much more exciting kind of visceral things recently.
OK, that's the real thing.
Yes.
The Old Vic. And then we've got the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, which is going to the Limbury, which is part of the Royal Opera.
Yes, and that is on at the moment, and that is running until the 24th of September. And actually, again, funnily enough, I seem to theme my weeks. This is, again, all about reality. So what we have here, it's set in an asylum initially, where Alice is a patient and a new doctor comes in. And we've got a little clip, which, having just made it sound very serious, we now have the clip for that one, which we can have a look at.
They all claim to be from a place called Wonderland.
Tea time!
Wonderland, 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 Wonderland.
I say, gosh, what a show.
Now, I raved to you ages ago about Message in a Bottle, which was the show with Sting's music about immigrants.
Which I went to see.
Which you did, and I'm always right, Michael, nearly always.
I loved it. Loved it.
Same group, Zoo Nation dance group, Kate Prince is the choreographer. Again, as you can see, hip-hop, a bit of soul, a bit of jazz, a bit of modern dance. Energy, fun, and again, serious themes, but also beautifully, joyously done. And what it is we're in the asylum, and one by one, Alice, it's genius. Eat me, drink me, make me bigger, make me smaller. She has body issues, she has eating disorders. The Queen of Hearts is a bully and a monster and aggressive. We get the backstory. She had a horrible, brutal, abusive childhood, so learned patterns. The White Rabbit, obsessed about time, has a mania. He's got huge anxiety, and so it goes on. So we get all of these little backstories. Tweedledum and Tweedledee is heartbreaking. In the book, the Lewis Carroll novel, they're fighting over a rattle. We eventually learn out that actually only Tweedledum is there. And when they fought as children over a rattle, something awful happened. So the whole thing, all this beautiful stuff, but then there's this music, and you can see this. The music is stunning, the choreography is stunning. You've got live singers up on a balcony. They get audience members up onto the stage halfway through the second act. When we go out of the asylum, they break out into the woods where they have their tea party, and they get audience members up to sit at the table with them and dance.
You loved it.
I absolutely loved it. It's clever.
You understood it, and it was great entertainment.
Clever, moving. There were children there. I heard a mum at the interval talking to her daughter about Alice's issues, which I thought was wonderful. And we were all absolutely on our feet at the end, singing and dancing. It was a joy. Joy, joy, joy.
So that's the one?
That's the one.
Very good indeed. Well, thank you very much, Stefan Kyriazis. Normally get that wrong. You're watching GB News. That concludes the first hour of this programme, but please don't go away. I'm going to transport you to the Promenade concerts with Sir Nicholas Kenyon. We're going to be talking about the attitudes of British Jews living in Britain today, and we're going to venture to Scotland for some fabulous food. Stick with me. Stefan.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It remains unsettled over the course of the day, overnight as well. Heavy rain and thunderstorms in places, particularly England and Wales, dry is towards the northwest. Low pressure starting to move away though as we head into next week, but a northwesterly airflow replacing it, so turning colder, particularly by Wednesday. Back to the rest of Sunday, though. An unsettled afternoon across England and Wales. Outbreaks of heavy rain for northern England down into Wales. Thunderstorms across central and eastern areas. Some localised flooding possible. The Met Office warning out through the day here. Temperatures up to around 22 Celsius in the sunshine. Rather cloudy across Scotland and Northern Ireland here. Temperatures are lower than they have been recent days. Cloud thick enough for some drizzle in places. Into the evening time, we've still got low pressure in charge. The risk of some heavy rain across southeast England, thunderstorms elsewhere, and this band of rain still producing some heavy bursts across Wales into northern England. A drier picture for Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, but still rather cloudy. Outbreaks of rain, perhaps heavy at times though, across eastern parts of Scotland and the borders as well. And then as we head through the evening and overnight, this low pressure system just slowly starts to pull a little further eastward. Still heavy rain across eastern parts of Scotland, pulling away into northern England, the Midlands, but then starting to ease later on in the night. Clearer skies pushing in across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland here. The winds turning around more of a northwesterly direction, so temperatures starting to fall into single figures. Still fairly mild for the time of year under the cloud across England and Wales. A grey start to Monday morning here, outbreaks of rain. This starting to push away, brightening skies for Wales, the West Country, sunny spells for Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland for a time before the next weather system starts to bring some rain in here by the afternoon. Still cloudy across eastern areas, but cooler for everyone, temperatures in the mid to high teens.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible...
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News. Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, is committed to decarbonising the national electricity grid by 2030, a target that most informed observers deem impossible to achieve. Meanwhile, spearheaded by Angela Rayner, the government aims to build 1.5 million homes over the course of this Parliament. Local authorities have received their orders, but is there any reason to think that Britain has the policies or the capacity to achieve that ambition? My panel will return to the studio with views on that. Poor, homesick and misunderstood. The Austrian composer Anton Bruckner plunged into despair during the winter of 1875. From the depths of his anguish came astonishing proof of his triumph of will, the composer's spirited Symphony No. 5. Former head of the BBC Proms, Sir Nicholas Kenyon, will be here to raise the curtain on what's been electrifying audiences at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Recent research shows that Jewish people are the faith group most likely to say that Britain is not a place where they feel free to practice their religious beliefs, free from fear of intimidation. I'll be joined by Dr. Jake Scott, the director of the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life, to discuss that. And finally, to our Taste of Britain. Earlier this week, Holyrood Minister Mary Goujon launched the inaugural Scottish Food and Drink September. The initiative aims to spotlight Scotland's diverse, high-quality produce and enhance the industry's national and international prominence. And Hannah Harley-Young will be here with a Scottish feast for me. All of that ahead. But first, your headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. It's just after 12 o'clock and these are your latest GB News headlines. Today marks 2 years since the passing of Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. She was on the throne for 70 years and was beloved by the nation and around the world. In the last half an hour, the King and Queen have arrived at Crathie Church, where the late Queen was a regular worshipper. Charles and Camilla will be attending the church near Balmoral for a Sunday service with prayer and remembrance of his late mother. The Prime Minister has hit out at the previous government this morning, saying the NHS has been broken in ways that he called unforgivable. These comments come as a Labour Commission review into how children are treated by the NHS is due to be published in the coming week. Speaking to the Camilla Tominay show earlier today, Health Secretary Wes Streeting set out Labour's plan to tackle the NHS crisis.
My reform agenda is about 3 big shifts out of hospital into the community. So we get the GP appointments that people need, the social care that people need, care closer to people's homes, better for patients, better value for taxpayers. It's a shift from analogue to digital, so we're not working with outdated systems and allowing the waste in the NHS to go unchallenged. And then thirdly, from sickness to prevention, making sure we're supporting people not just to live longer, but to live well for longer through good public health and prevention measures. Those are the pillars of Labour's reform agenda.
Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Atkins told GB News she's concerned Labour are using this report to cover their plans to increase taxes.
What concerns me about the way that Labour is seeking to report this report is that they seem to be chasing headlines. Lord Darcy is a very respected, eminent surgeon. Of course, he is also, it's fair to say, a former Labour minister and a former Labour peer. But this report should be about what the state of the NHS is and providing solutions. And what worries me is that Labour is using this report as cover for the tax rises they plan to raise on us all at the budget in October.
Last night, Donald Trump spoke in Wisconsin, a key area for his election campaign. The Republican presidential candidate pledged trade restrictions and to clamp down on immigration. Trump was also critical of both current US President Joe Biden and his election opponent Kamala Harris. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Biden won, I will never know. To me, it's one of the greatest miracles. To me, it's a great miracle. But how the hell that guy won? But he won. And he got, in this one, he got 14 million votes. She got no votes. And then they put her in anyway. The bosses put her in because she's controlled by them. But she will be the worst president. He is the worst president in history. She will be worse than him. She will be worse than him. And Trump is never wrong. I am never, ever wrong.
Back over to the UK now. The Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for rain for much of England and Wales. That will remain in place till 6 o'clock tonight. They've said this means a small chance of power cuts and flooding in people's homes, with some areas expecting up to 60 millimetres of rain by the end of the day. The annual conference for the Trades Union Congress begins in Brighton today. They say topics on the agenda will include protecting the right to strike, building a fairer economy and winning a better future for working people. Last night, Oasis announced they would send out an invite-only registration form for people to join a private ballot for tickets. This comes after millions attempted to obtain tickets last weekend for the band's gigs next summer, but many were left disappointed. Oasis and Ticketmaster have also faced criticism following so-called dynamic pricing being used, leading to an investigation being launched. If you received that email overnight, a very good luck to you in trying to get those tickets. And we're now into the final day of the Paralympics over in Paris, where Team GB have won a massive 123 medals so far. David Weir was hoping to improve on the 5th place he achieved in Tokyo in the men's T54 marathon, but only managed to equal his position this morning. But it's good news in the kayaking, with a gold and a silver in the women's single KL2 and a gold in the KL3. And in the last few minutes, Jack Ayres has taken silver in the men's single 200 metres VL3 event. So a brilliant day in the kayaking for Team GB. The closing ceremony will take place tonight, with swimmer Poppy Maskell and taekwondo athlete Matt Bush carrying the flag for Team GB. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophie Reaper. Ed Miliband, the Cabinet Minister responsible for achieving net zero, introduced the Great British Energy Bill to the House of Commons. It sets up an entity in Aberdeen which may spend £8 billion. Many denounced the bill as thin and vague, and most observers declared that his target of decarbonising the national electricity grid by 2030 is unachievable. Meanwhile, similar scepticism surrounds the target of building 1.5 million homes during the course of this Parliament. To discuss the politics of over-ambition, I'm rejoined now by Madeline Grant, Scarlett Maguire and Andy Twelves. Andy, the problem is that we have been, and you can build lots of wind farms and solar farms, and they can contribute an enormous amount to the electricity grid, as long as you've got some sun and as long as you've got some wind. But it's very difficult to get away from natural gas for the residue, what you need on those days, particularly in winter, when there isn't much sun and there isn't much wind. And, I mean, trade unions know more about this than anybody. These targets are unachievable, aren't they?
I think they're certainly ambitious, but I think...
No.
Well, I don't know about unachievable.
Unachievable.
I don't know about unachievable. I think ambitious would be the word that I would use to describe it. But, you know, it's...
How diplomatic.
Well, you know, known for it. But, yeah, I mean, he's in the first... This is the time to be ambitious. He's in the first year of his first term. If he's ever going to be ambitious and really try and, you know, use his political capital on things that may appear slightly out of reach, now would be the time. I think it's also great that it's based up in Aberdeen. You know, you've got away from the kind of classical kind of industrial investments the last 30 years, generally in the kind of south, and I think that's a very positive thing. But realistically, the markets have been told that we're going to reach or attempt to reach net zero by 2030. It makes sense to kind of chill them out and keep them on side if we are actually making active commitments like this 8 billion in Aberdeen for GB Energy, that we are trying to reach that net zero limit. And I don't think it is unachievable. I think it is ambitious. And that is the ambition that this government needs that, you know, the last government kind of did lack in the last few years.
You refer to Aberdeen as though it was some distant city. And in fact, Aberdeen was the very centre of the energy policy and industry of this country. And now Labour is killing it off. So, I mean, the reason that Great British Energy, if that's what it's called, is being sent to Aberdeen is that all the jobs in Aberdeen are being destroyed.
I mean, you know, lots and lots of jobs have been destroyed over the last 30 years under the Tory governments. You know, if you look at the post-industrial towns across the Midlands and the North and some in Scotland, you know, a lot of places that were the industrial hubs of Britain have been destroyed. So I think it is good that, you know, the Labour Party is investing in places that aren't southern cities.
You say it's great to have ambition at the beginning, and actually with that I agree, and I wish I saw a bit more of it actually in the government. But there is such a thing as, you know, riding for a fall or, you know, walking onto the rake that's going to hit you in the face. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that he's not going to achieve these targets. What does he look like then?
I mean, if he doesn't make it, then I'm sure that there will have been substantial enough progress that he'll be able to reach it within the next 5 or 10 years, which is then, you know, a good thing. I think the original target for net zero was 2040. You know, if they undershoot that and hit 2035, that's still very, very positive. We will still be, you know, one of the European leaders in the kind of green agenda, and I think that's a very positive thing.
Funny you should mention 2035. That was the Conservative target.
Well, it changed a few times, didn't it? It went 2030, 35, then up to 45, then 50, and then back to 35. Yeah. So, you know, it flies.
35, I think, was the latest iteration. Scarlett, what we're talking here about a politician, Ed Miliband, taking a tremendous risk with his reputation, setting out to achieve what I think is the unachievable, and quite a lot of people agree with me that it's unachievable. Now, what are the politics of this? What is it about public opinion that leads a politician to say that he's going to achieve something which many of us think is unachievable?
I don't know quite what it is, because often they actually do then the opposite. I agree with you. I think actually in general we're seeing a lack of ambition for Labour and a lack of promise of change, more backward-looking, sort of blaming the Conservatives for everything. And actually I think they've misjudged public opinion there. I think people want to know what they're going to do and what change they're going to bring. With that specifically about Ed Miliband, I think if he does fail to deliver these, and it isn't if, then he'll fall foul of public opinion in a way that all the politicians before him have. And actually the public are increasingly impatient with politicians and increasingly don't believe them when they promise things because they feel like those promises have been broken so many times. And actually, I think that's the biggest danger for Labour, is that they're perceived to be just like all the other politicians. That's why you see the rise of parties outside of the mainstream, or smaller parties like Reform, Greens, Independents, is because people are sick of the same old Westminster politicians who are sort of saying one thing with their fingers crossed behind their back.
And specifically on net zero, is your reading that there is such public enthusiasm about an early net zero that it's worth taking these political risks?
I think net zero is an interesting one. It's nuanced like all of these things. So the public, yes, are in general very worried about climate change. We do not actually have a hyper-polarised debate about climate change in this country, as you can see in other places like America. People are worried about it. People are worried about what it will mean for the environment and for them immediately as well, actually. But what people are more worried about, especially coming out of the cost of living crisis and the sky-high energy bills we saw after the invasion of Ukraine, people are more worried about their personal finances. And if any of this means a hike in price, they're not going to take to it very kindly, even those who are worried about climate change.
And Madeleine, I think back to the early days of Tony Blair, and one of the things that struck me about him, and I say this very genuinely, is I think he really thought that when you were Prime Minister, if you pulled the lever, it would lead to policy change, it would lead to new outcomes. And I think he was quite strongly disappointed by the fact that, the levers of power are not attached to anything. Do you have this feeling about both housing policy and energy policy? I mean, 1.5 million houses, where are the people to build them? How are the changes to planning policy to be achieved? What do you think?
Well, I think actually that this is an area where Labour MPs seem to agree very strongly. I think they understand that actually this is one of the few areas in which they could spark growth because we've had a very sluggish regime when it came to building houses. However, there's a lot of institutional resistance that they need to get around. They need to look at, can we really imagine this current Labour Party, for example, saying we're going to completely limit the number of environmental assessments that you have to go through, the whole arcane, arduous process and the amount of judicial review and all the other things that hamper house building? I can't really picture it, even if they have the motivation. And frankly, with net migration at the amount that it currently is, some of these conversations are going to be kind of academic in a way, because a lot of what is built will quickly be absorbed by newer arrivals. That's just a kind of arithmetic conclusion. And when it comes to energy, I'm very, very concerned that it very much appears to be that so far Ed Miliband and his team have really dropped the ball. They've stalled various projects in relation to nuclear power and small modular reactors, which global experience tells us this is one of the very few ways that you can create enormous amounts of green energy without impoverishing citizens. France tells us this very clearly. The fact that they're leaning so hard on solar and wind and they seem to be neglecting nuclear is a very worrying thing. It suggests that they're putting ideology ahead of pragmatism.
Yes, so clashes of policy objectives you're highlighting there. I mean, do you think we're looking at, early days ministerial naivety? Are we looking at dishonesty, promising targets that cannot possibly be achieved? What do you think's at play, as it were? What's the psychology of the ministers involved in these promises?
Good question. Well, I think that Ed Miliband does very much believe what he says, but I think he surrounds himself with people who are likely to support his worldview. And actually, in the case of, for example, decarbonising the grid by 2030, ignoring an awful lot of industry experts who say that it's impossible. In fact, he wrote a letter to the head of the National Grid last week, I think, in which he strongly implied that he doesn't still understand how he's going to get there, and asking them to give their advice, which also doesn't bode well. It doesn't suggest great competency in this area. But I think, again, it's this point about ideology taking precedence over what's practical and possible.
Andy, do trade unionists think of their members only, as it were, as trade unionists, that is, say, people in a place of work? Or do they also think about them as consumers, that is, people who pay energy bills, or indeed people who may live in a small town or a village where they don't particularly want a new housing estate, where they may be given to NIMBYism? So, I mean, do trade unionists concern themselves with the things that concern their members outside the workplace? I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see it with, I think Unite kicked off, I think the BMA kicked off, a couple of other unions have kicked off about this winter fuel allowance. Yeah. By definition, if you're a pensioner, you're not going to be a trade unionist because you're not in work. But they're taking a stand over that, and that is something that could potentially, that would affect their members, 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line, whatever. So I think they certainly do, and I think they have made numerous statements and comments about kind of Ed Miliband's plan to kind of build GB Energy and invest in the kind of clean energy agenda. And they've also made comments for and against, depending on which way they stand, on nuclear power. So I think trade unions definitely do view them as consumers as well as workers, but I think primarily it is this agenda will create jobs because people are going to have to build the houses, people are going to have to set up the energy stations, people are going to have to man the the cooling centres, whatever. So I think they see it as an industrial opportunity primarily, and then they look at it as a consumer perspective after. Scarlett, with you, one more go at the public opinion thing, because it was evident that just at the end of the Conservative government, they were beginning to think that being against net zero was a political advantage. And Labour obviously thinks bringing net zero forward to the earliest imaginable date is good politics. Can they both be right?
They actually can, I think, depending on which voters they're trying to appeal to and the ways in which they go about it. I think what the Conservatives were picking up on there was that point about people's personal finances. And so the anger over ULEZ, especially the way in which it was rolled out, or the proposed extension of it was rolled out, was sensed that, especially when we're talking to people, they were saying, well, they don't care that it's going to cost us a lot of money and we can't afford to give any. And so obviously ULEZ is not actually a net zero policy, but I think you can sort of put it in the same bucket. And that's what gave the Conservatives the idea that it might be a winner for them. So I think there is definitely there is a part of the electorate out there that will resent having targets imposed on them that impact their everyday life negatively. These are people who have already found the last few years difficult and do not want anything that will make it feel more difficult. Likewise, we know that when we poll Labour voters, so if you think Labour desperately trying to keep this already quite small coalition together, not many voters out there, they would like to see bolder action on the environment. But this is, again, when you get to the problems of public opinion, people can want contradictory things at once. They can want more green investment and they can not want more taxes. It's just like, I might want to be in better shape, but I also don't want to get up an hour earlier to go to the gym. It's the same sort of thing, and this is why it's important for politicians to lead the public rather than try and follow what they're doing. And I think both parties on this are actually a bit guilty of the latter.
Yeah, Madeleine, bring together our earlier discussion, which was about the Conservative leadership, and our latter discussion, which is about over-ambition. So, does the next Conservative Party leader have an opportunity, do you think, as Labour, in my view, over-promises?
Yeah, I think absolutely. There is a feeling of, I think I would almost describe it as mutinousness amongst the general public, cynicism towards almost everybody. And I think that already the promises have been ambitious and we're already seeing a great deal of resentment, and it's all happened tremendously quickly, actually. So I think there is an opportunity, but it's possible that, you know, as Scarlett was saying earlier, that we're now in the realm where all politicians are seen as kind of equally bad. So anything from the mainstream will be looked on with suspicion, and people will increasingly look outside of the two-party system, even within the electoral straitjacket of first past the post, which has obviously, I think, meant that we've had very different outcomes to our friends on the continent, whose government, whose politics is not constrained in that way. But I've never had a stronger sense of people saying, oh, they're all the same, all politicians are just as bad as each other, and this level of cynicism.
Well, thank you very much, panel. Fascinating discussion. Madeleine Grant, Scarlett Maguire and Andy Twelves. Coming up, we'll be off to the Promenade Concerts with Sir Nicholas Kenyon. He's been to hear a new work from Thomas Addis, which marked the inaugural season of the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra's new chief conductor, Sir Simon Rattle. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Bad news for Liberal mothers who want to score virtue points by transitioning their kids, Lewis.
You know, this
tell us what it is.
Is that California dad is granted full custody of 4-year-old son after boy's mom tried to raise the child non-binary.
It's almost like cult-like behaviour. You've got the mother transitioning and then the transitioning the son as well. It's interesting that, you know, it's almost like a religion. You get, you know, if you're a Christian, your kids are probably going to be Christian. If you're, you know, Hindu, your kids are probably going to be Hindu. And if you're transgender, your kids are probably going to be transgender.
There's absolutely a causation there. We see plenty of times in videos. This is exactly it. Like, and also we see the children of celebrities and people in particularly sort of liberal environments. It doesn't happen in some village in Indonesia or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there's no such thing as a trans child. There's no such thing as non-binary. What there is are people with mental health issues and parents who want a virtual signal and also want to brainwash their children. This is an egregious example of that, where she was basically taking him to Disneyland, but he couldn't get on a ride unless he wore princess shoes. I mean, really evil, horrible stuff. You know, forced to wear a dress on his birthday. You know, just really nasty stuff. Now, here's the thing. You talk about the court going to him. No, that's not what happened. He took 800 pages of documentary evidence. He took 8 hours of police body camera footage showing this mental behaviour from the mother. And guess what? The courts ruled that the mum got him. They ruled against him. The only reason that he got custody of his child is because, thank God, a child protective services officer randomly got involved, looked into it themselves, and that's how he eventually got custody of the child. So the courts in America are utterly captured.
GB News, the People's Channel. I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Kirill Petrenko must be one of the best conductors in the world, which was rather confirmed when in 2015, one of the world's best orchestras, the Berlin Philharmonic, elected him chief conductor. And together they brought Bruckner's Fifth Symphony to the Royal Albert Hall last Sunday. It's the 200th anniversary of Anton Bruckner's birth this year, and his 9 symphonies are being played across the world. And then equal in their intensity are his choral works. 3 motets were performed last weekend by the BBC singers under Owain Payne. To enlighten us on what's been rallying the audiences at the Royal Albert Hall this week, I'm joined by the former head of the BBC Proms, Sir Nicholas Kenyon. Welcome back to the programme. Welcome to GB News. It's been a rather extraordinary week with the great orchestras and conductors coming to town, is that right?
And this has been a vintage series of proms because this was what happened in the best of proms seasons, which is there is a momentum towards this final couple of weeks where guests from abroad would come in. Now, in this case, it has not been American orchestras who are not touring so much at the moment, but these 2 tremendous European orchestras, the Berlin Phil and the Bavarian Radio Symphony. Now, you mentioned Kirill Petrenko as one of the best conductors in the world. I would agree with that, but he's very little known here. He hasn't worked in London, unlike the Bavarian Radio's new chief, Simon Rattle, who is extremely familiar to us. But you had orchestral playing of a phenomenal level from both orchestras, and I think the intensity which Petrenko in particular gets out of his forces is amazing, considering how little he does physically, you know? He just draws them together. Apparently in rehearsal, he takes everything apart in the most amazing jigsaw-like way and then assembles it. But the results in a really craggy piece like Bruckner's Fifth Symphony were astonishing. When we get to Rattle, he was taking a much more, I would say, relaxed and humane approach to Bruckner, which is equally valid. The Bavarian Radio brass just sound glorious. They have a magnificent first horn. And Bruckner's Fourth Symphony, which is somewhat of a more relaxed work than Bruckner 5, and it's usually known as the Romantic Symphony, came across with equal impact. And there were some absolutely beautiful sounds. But then with that, Rattle introduced a new work by Thomas Adès, Aquifer, based on geological movement of water within rocks. And I thought that was one of the most impressive new works I've heard for a long time.
Thomas Adès is now a well-established British composer, and Rattle, I think, has been very supportive of Adès throughout his career. Would you dwell for a moment longer on what you think makes a great conductor, or what makes it great for the audience to see a fine performance by a great conductor?
Well, it's interesting you put it that way because in between those two orchestras, we had the Paris Orchestra with the young wunderkind conductor Klaus Macheler, who's only 28.
It's extraordinary, yes.
He is extraordinary, but I felt, to go to your point, that what he was doing was choreographing the work for the audience, and I wasn't sure how much impact it was having on what the orchestra did. Now,
just so that viewers understand you on that, so he's almost balletic. He dances around. There's a tremendous amount of movement. So you say that in a way he is interpreting the music to the audience rather than these movements being strictly useful to the orchestra and how they play together.
I'm saying exactly that, but I think I must be wrong about that because he is in extraordinary demand from the world's great orchestras. He came here with Paris. He's also in charge of the Oslo Philharmonic. And as from 2027, I think it is, he's going to be the music director of both the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam and also the Chicago Symphony Orchestra over in the States. So absolutely phenomenal demand from orchestras who must absolutely relish what they get out of him too. I think one of the things is it is so difficult to tell what effect a conductor is making until you actually see them in rehearsing, taking pieces apart and so on. But all these three conductors this week made a tremendous impression on the audience.
You made a reference at the beginning of your remarks to, getting back to where we were, getting back to a tradition. It sounds as though you think this has been, at least in part, an outstanding season of promenade concerts.
I think it has been an outstanding season artistically. It's director David Pickard's last season, and I think also that audiences, anecdotally, have been absolutely tremendous. All the ones I went to were packed out and enthusiastic, and I think what one sensed was a slight dip after COVID and the lockdown and the difficulties of performing and touring during that period have now really raced back to... And remember, the proms were about democratising classical music and making it available to everybody. And when you see those thousands of people in the Albert Hall, it's a tremendous, reassuring and inspiring sight and sound.
Yes, now you made a reference to the size of the place. I wonder when you were director whether the acoustics were an issue. I wonder when the Berlin Phil, for example, decides whether it's going to come or not. Are the acoustics of the Royal Albert Hall an issue for it? Or does the democratisation overcome all other considerations?
I think every orchestra wants to be at the proms because of the intense attention that they get from this capacity audience, and also the fact that the hall is round and it sort of sweeps together an orchestra and its audience into one community. That's a very uplifting and inspiring sight, and it tends to overcome any acoustical problems.
I mean, it is an extraordinary thought, isn't it? Because here we're dealing with a 19th century building when we didn't have any of the advantages of the science that we have now, the understanding of acoustics. All sorts of modifications have been made to it, and yet it absolutely does the job, doesn't it?
Well, you have to credit things like the mushrooms that have been put in the ceiling.
Hanging from the ceiling to improve the acoustics. Nicholas Kenyon, thank you so much for coming in, talking to us about a vintage season of the proms. Coming up, we'll be discussing how life for the British Jewish community has been impacted in Britain since the 7th of October last year. But first, we've got headlines with Sophie Reaper.
Thank you, Michael. It's 12:30 and these are your latest GB News headlines. Today marks 2 years since the passing of Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. She was on the throne for 70 years and was beloved by the nation and around the world. In the last hour or so, the King and Queen have arrived at Crathie Kirk Church, where the late Queen was a regular worshipper. Charles and Camilla will be attending the church near Balmoral for a Sunday service with prayer and remembrance of his late mother. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has hit out at the previous government this morning, saying the NHS has been broken in ways that he called unforgivable. These comments come as a Labour-commissioned review into how children are treated by the NHS is due to be published in the coming week. Speaking earlier, Health Secretary Wes Streeting said we need to make our NHS fit for the future. He was also asked about Labour's plans for VAT on private school fees after one parent has launched legal action against the government. Here's what he had to say.
Schools can't say they weren't warned. We did make it very clear. And the priority for this money is to invest in the state education that benefits the 93% of pupils in this country, including the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. So that's the thrust of the policy. That's the government's agenda. It's for the 93% at state schools, not simply the 7% at independent schools. And people were forewarned, so they can't complain now.
Meanwhile, Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Atkins told GB News she's concerned Labour are using this report into the NHS to cover their plans to increase taxes.
What concerns me about the way that Labour is seeking to report this report is that they seem to be chasing headlines. Lord Darzi is a very respected, eminent surgeon. Of course, he is also, it's fair to say, a former Labour minister and a former Labour peer. But this report should be about what the state of the NHS is and providing solutions. And what worries me is that Labour is using this report as cover for the tax rises they plan to raise on us all at the budget in October.
And the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning for rain for much of England and Wales, which will remain in place till 6 o'clock tonight. They've said this means a small chance of power cuts and flooding in people's homes, with some areas expecting up to 60 millimetres of rain by the end of the day. So if you're in the affected area, make sure you're carrying your umbrella with you for the rest of the day. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, I'm Sophie Reaper. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It remains unsettled over the course of the day, overnight as well. Heavy rain and thunderstorms in places, particularly England and Wales, driest towards the northwest. Low pressure starting to move away though as we head into next week, but a northwesterly airflow replacing it, so turning colder, particularly by Wednesday. Back to the rest of Sunday, though. An unsettled afternoon across England and Wales. Outbreaks of heavy rain for northern England down into Wales. Thunderstorms across central and eastern areas. Some localised flooding possible. The Met Office warning out through the day here. Temperatures up to around 22 Celsius in the sunshine. Rather cloudy across Scotland and Northern Ireland here. Temperatures are lower than they have been recent days. Cloud thick enough for some drizzle in places. Into the evening time, we've still got low pressure in charge. The risk of some heavy rain across southeast England, thunderstorms elsewhere, and this band of rain still producing some heavy bursts across Wales into northern England. A drier picture for Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland, but still rather cloudy. Outbreaks of rain, perhaps heavy at times though, across eastern parts of Scotland and the borders as well. And then as we head through the evening and overnight, this low pressure system just slowly starts to pull a little further eastward. Still heavy rain across eastern parts of Scotland, pulling away into northern England and Midlands, but then starting to ease later on in the night. Clearer skies pushing in across Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland here. The wind's turning around to more of a northwesterly direction, so temperatures starting to fall into single figures. Still fairly mild for the time of year under the cloud across England and Wales. A grey start to Monday morning here, outbreaks of rain. This starting to push away, brightening skies for Wales, the West Country, sunny spells for Northern Ireland, parts of Scotland for a time before the next weather system starts to bring some rain in here by the afternoon. Still cloudy across eastern areas, but cooler for everyone. Temperatures in the mid to high teens.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Jewish individuals in Britain maintain a sense of optimism despite a noticeable increase in anti-Semitic incidents. That has emerged as a central finding during a virtual panel discussion hosted by the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life on Tuesday. The event was titled Living as a Jew in Modern Britain, and it featured esteemed panellists from various branches of Judaism, Rabbi Jonathan Romain of the Progressive Judaism, Michael Rowe of Orthodox Judaism, and Rachel Tax of Reform Judaism. The panellists collectively acknowledged that while there has been a discernible rise in anti-Semitic activities, the overall conditions for Jews in Britain remain largely positive. This event was held after the government's decision to suspend 30 Israeli arms export licenses, immediately after 6 hostages were murdered by Hamas, and the announcement was condemned by many leading figures in the British Jewish community, including the chief rabbi. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Jake Scott, one of the organisers of the event and director of the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life, to discuss this more. Very interesting. So at one time, I announced to viewers that there is concern amongst Jewish people, that they're worried, they have some fear of intimidation, they're worried about being able to practice their religion freely. On the other hand, as I've just indicated, people think that this is a pretty good place to live. Try and put these two thoughts together for me.
Thank you. So I think that's a very, very good way to start this. So the findings from the panel were framed by our monthly attitudes tracker. Now, we hold a 2,000 survey sample size representative sample every month. And these findings were found in the beginning of August, and roughly 47% of Jews say that they think that they do not feel free to practice in the UK. Or should I say, roughly half think that they are free to practice in the UK. But at the same time, when we spoke to representatives, because statistics only show half the story, when we spoke to representatives from different groups of Jews in the country, they broadly said the same thing, which is that things are less good, but they're still good. And when they talk about their youth and their time at school, they experience very little in terms of anti-Semitic attacks. They experience very little in terms of comments. Most religious people from minority groups across Britain tend to say questions around, practice or eating habits or so on tend to be from a place of curiosity rather than prejudice. But unfortunately, since October last year, Jewish people have experienced greater levels of discrimination and caution, which is really interesting. And a particular comment which I thought was a shame, came from Michael on the panel, who said that when he was in London, he's, as he described himself, visibly Jewish, and he wears a yarmulke and so on. And someone basically said, tapped him on the shoulder and said, just be careful. Out of concern, but still. Yeah, a discouraging thing. I wonder to what extent this is part of a pattern which would affect other people who were religious and made their religion clear. I'm thinking maybe of Muslims and Jews. Now, obviously, there's also been a rise in anti-Muslim hatred since October the 7th. Of course. Since the beginning of the Gaza war. And Christian people are more and more under criticism. There have been issues about people displaying a crucifix in public and so on. And also some traditional Christian attitudes, like strong support for heterosexual marriage, these have come under scrutiny. So I wonder, are Jewish people sharing a fate here with other religious groups? So, as I say, we have our monthly attitudes tracker in which we have representative samples of Jews, Muslims, Christians and Hindus, smaller typically of the other faiths, but that's largely because of the difficulty in methodology. And there is definitely a trend, as you say, between religious groups. There are differences of degrees, but they're broadly in agreement. For example, Jewish people and Christians are broadly in agreement that Christianity has shaped Western beliefs in principles such as equality and compassion and so on. But this is out of kilter with the majority of the population, many of which actually think that Christianity has sort of had its time and that it is no longer applicable. And I say this, Muslims and Hindus broadly agree with Christians and Jews. So there's a very cross-faith attitude to the role that faith plays in public life. But the non-religious components of Britain, and even some of the religious components in Britain, seem to have this opinion of, well, we've arrived and we don't need religion anymore. And the whole point of our mission is to show that actually religion plays a very positive role and really informs people of faith's attitudes to public life.
So the rise of anti-Semitic incidents and the reduction in the level of comfort of Jewish people in this country, are they, would you say, wholly related to what happened on October the 7th and since October the 7th? Or is there, as it were, a secular change in the position of Jews and a secular change in the position of religious people?
So I think, if I may, one of the important points of holding events like this is that we speak to people of faith rather than about people of faith. So I would be happy to convey what they've said rather than assume. And I think one of the points made by Rabbi Jonathan was that October the 7th was almost a culmination in a series of shifts towards Jewish people in Britain. He pointed to Jeremy Corbyn's premiership of the Labour Party as an indicator.
Leadership, yeah.
Leadership, of course, as a sort of indicator of how things had changed and a catalyst for the change towards British Jews. But they also have pointed, of course, to just a general shift in terms of people's attitudes to faith in general. So, again, it's this kind of, rising tide lifts all boats, declining tide carries them down. Unfortunately, as faith becomes seen with greater scepticism, people of faith, in minority groups especially, experience greater scepticism themselves.
And do you think it's simply helpful to talk about this? You've come on GB News to talk to me about it. Is this part of the solution, to talk about this issue, this problem?
So one of the phrases that I think is more and more common with these things is think and do, rather than just think. You often hear the phrase think and do tank rather than just think tank. Our position is largely around education. Conversation, statistics, research, this has to be the starting point. But off the back of that, changes have to be delivered. So what we're trying to do with the Institute is encourage people to think a little bit more openly about faith, but at the same time challenge their presumptions about different faith groups and show that actually faith has a very positive role to play in life. But off the back of that, take action to be more positive, be more encouraging, and to actually be more optimistic about faith in life.
Thank you. Most interesting work. Thank you for coming on and talking to me today, Dr. Jake Scott. After the break, we'll be venturing virtually to Scotland to indulge in some Scottish delicacies with Hannah Harley-Young.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Luke Douglas-Hugh is a plogger. It's the act of jogging and picking up litter at the same time.
Oh, I thought it had something to do with cycling, but I was thinking of recycling. You better explain what the term is.
Plogging originates really as an expression from Sweden, from someone called Erik Austen, who combined the two words of plocka in Swedish and jogging, so plogging.
And what does plog uppa mean?
Picking up.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Do you take a bag with you or something and you pick up rubbish?
You do.
There you go.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of being a jogger, how do you combine the two? Because joggers wouldn't
You have
want
to keep up the
Yeah,
pace,
they wouldn't
don't
want to
you?
keep stopping to pick stuff up, would they?
I'm the coastline runner. I run
Yes.
the coast collecting plastic pollution.
Which
mainly.
coast?
Well, I've done the whole of the East Coast, from Lowestoft to Leith.
Wow.
And then cut across from Edinburgh to Glasgow on the Grand Union Canal.
Yeah.
A few years ago, someone said, Luke, don't get all grand and stuff. You're not the coastline runner, you're just a plogger. And I thought, hang on a minute, what's that? And I looked into it, and I realised that that's what I was doing.
Do you do it entirely on your own, or do you do it in groups?
I do it. I originally started on my own. I got clapped off by a mayor in Great Yarmouth, but now more and more people join me, and I.
What I find interesting is that, I mean, jogging, you could say, is just something you do for yourself, for your body, but what you're doing is something extra. I mean, you're making a difference. Do you think you make much of a difference?
No, to be honest.
Oh.
I don't. I think I'm making a difference in raising awareness of not polluting our beaches so much.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the programme. From the renowned Arbroath Smokies and exquisite varieties of Scotch whisky to the iconic haggis, the food and drink of Scotland is a culinary landscape that's worth exploring. And this is Scottish Food and Drink September, dedicating the month to the celebration of Scotland's finest and most innovative fare. Hannah Harley-Young, creator of the Crazy Sexy Food podcast, joins me now. Hi, lovely to have you here. So I am half Scottish.
You are.
My mother was born in Scotland. Now, one of the things I think that marks someone brought up with some Scottish heritage from others is the way their porridge. And do you know this?
No, tell me.
Well, I can't bear porridge with any sweetener in it at all.
Yeah.
I eat my porridge with salt.
What?
With salt. Absolutely. It's absolutely delicious. And I could not conceive of having my porridge in any other way.
Just any toppings on it?
No, I might very occasionally allow myself some milk with my porridge, but that would absolutely be it. I wouldn't even go so far as cream.
Wow.
I mean, I would also allow my porridge to be made with milk, although I generally, when I make it only with water.
That is fascinating. I mean, to be honest, when I knew that I was doing this segment this week, I feel like this week was a real homework task for me because I'll be honest, I haven't been around Scottish food much in my life, but I obviously know all the obvious. And I thought I'd bring in a selection of some of, I guess, the quintessential culinary delights of the North. I mean, we have in front of us haggis.
I think we should begin with some haggis.
So, Michael, I've never eaten haggis before. This is going to be the first time.
Well, have you eaten anything like haggis before? Have you eaten anything that is made from the intestines of an animal?
I mean, I've had things like chopped liver and, you know, a bit of offal here and there.
Well, there we are. I mean, I got a great surprise. I was holding a great... When I was in government, I was holding a great party in Scotland, and I had a lot of Spanish visitors, and I was offering them haggis, and I thought that they would be astonished by haggis and maybe repelled. But when they ate it, they said, oh, no, this is morcilla. So, you know, there is an equivalent in Spain.
Absolutely.
So if I recall, and you've probably been mugging it up, which I have not, but haggis is made within the stomach of a sheep.
Yes.
And you take the heart and the lungs and some other part of the sheep and you mash it up.
With onions, oatmeal, suet.
Yes.
And it's stuffed into the sheep's stomach. But a lot of the haggis you get these days, especially sort of the slightly cheaper varieties in supermarkets, it's usually an artificial casing.
Oh.
You know what? This is actually quite nice.
I think it's absolutely heavenly. And
it's very savoury.
To me, it's two things. Yes, to me, it's two things. It's both the taste and the texture. You quite rightly referred to the oatmeal going in there. So it's got this crunchy, granular sort of texture. marvellous.
It is. I mean, obviously, as the national dish of Scotland, I think this is always so interesting to me when it comes to food and sort of like word association. If you list all of the ingredients in haggis, you would sort of be a bit like, oh, no, I don't want to eat that. But actually, if you hadn't have told me what it was and I tried it, I'd be like, oh, that's delicious.
I think that's a lovely thing. And so where did you obtain this haggis? Where can you, for example, in England, obtain haggis?
I mean, this is... we had a little bit of a situation beforehand.
You've had a
and I
day.
do want to do a big shout-out to Deanie's, which is an amazing Scottish cafe in East London, who was supplying us some beautiful cheese toasties with haggis. This is what they're known for, but we got a little bit let down with a courier company. But anyway, that's fine. I'll deal with them later. But this is actually from a supermarket, so it is widely available.
Now, what is this orange liquid?
Obviously very natural in colour. This is Iron Brew.
Yes.
This is considered the other national dish of Scotland. We are going to come to the real deal in a second.
I once filmed in the Iron Brew factory. I mean, this is an institution in Scotland, this drink.
Yes.
So for those who've not drunk it...
What do you think of Iron Brew?
Well, it's just not my kind of drink.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I think I'm too old for it. No, because it's, it's kind of very sweet.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a million miles from a sort of Fanta or Coca-Cola or whatever. I mean, the IRN implies that it gives you strength.
Well, they originally, when they sort of launched, they were actually called Iron, as in I-R-O-N, Brew, B-R-E-W, and they actually got sued because it was implying that there was iron in it, and actually they had to change the spelling of it. I would love to talk about this, because this is sort of a bit of an infamous...
You absolutely have to talk about that.
An infamous Scottish delight.
Do you mind if I lift it up and show it to the camera? I mean, I wonder if anyone can identify this dainty item. I'm going to give it a bit of a twirl.
This is the famous battered Mars bar. This was invented in Scotland in a fish and chip shop in the 90s. I believe the Scots are quite happy to sort of declare it as theirs. But here we go. I'm going to have to do a little bit as well.
Here we go.
It'd be rude not to.
It's completely shocking. I mean, first of all, I just stuck my teeth together so that no more communication is possible.
Oh, wow.
Give me an antidote. That blue bottle is our antidote.
This is a bit of whiskey. Have you tried Hague Club whiskey before?
It's an emergency. I can't talk about it. I need to counteract the deep-fried Mars bar.
Absolutely.
Here we go.
Absolutely.
Oops,
whiskey being the national drink of Scotland. This is Hague Club. Beautiful, beautiful whiskey. I love their bottles.
Now, let me just say to viewers, we've not been able to represent Scotland as well today as we'd like to have done with the food items here. But it is a very serious food in a very serious country in a culinary way. I have friends who make cheese in Scotland, who produce delicious meat in Scotland. So I'm delighted that Scotland is celebrating its cuisine. Dawn Neeson will be here in just a moment. On this second anniversary of the death of Queen Elizabeth II, I want to wish you... I want to thank all of you who give public service. May we all attempt to do our duty in the coming week. Thanks to all my guests today. I'll be back hosting this programme next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Low pressure slowly starting to move away, still some heavy showers through until the evening time. Staying changeable into next week, but turning colder as the winds turn around to more of a northerly direction. There's that low pressure moving away, and then we see the wind switching to a northwesterly direction, this cold front introducing colder air as we head towards Tuesday and Wednesday next week. This evening, though, low pressure still bringing outbreaks of heavy rain across southeast Scotland, northern England into Wales, the Midlands, but starting to ease as we head into the early hours. Though the odd heavy burst is still possible, the odd rumble of thunder across eastern areas, drier further north and west, but turning colder, temperatures in single figures across parts of Scotland to start the day. But there is some bright and sunny spells around across northern parts of Scotland, central Scotland to start Monday morning. A few showers, though, across the northern and western Isles. These may may start filtering inland as the day progresses. Any mist and fog patches clearing here. Similar across Northern Ireland, sunny spells to start the day. This cloud from the last 24 hours is still affecting parts of northern and eastern England. Brighter skies already moving into Wales and the West Country. Some fog patches first thing, but that will soon clear. And then through the day on Monday, the weather system will slowly push its way eastwards, but it takes its time. So eastern England